The silence inside the Washington Manor wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that came with old money, the type purchased through decades of influence and maintained through carefully cultivated fear. Malcolm Washington, a man whose signature had appeared on 3 consecutive Fortune 500 covers, sat at the head of an antique mahogany table that had witnessed generations of power moves and family secrets. His dark hands, weathered but steady, gripped the crystal glass of bourbon he couldn't bring himself to drink. He wasn't focused on the amber liquid. His eyes were locked on his son. Darius Washington should have been everything his father had built the empire for. At 26, he should have been commanding boardrooms, negotiating international shipping contracts, preparing to take the helm of Washington Global Logistics, a $45 billion transportation conglomerate that moved goods across 6 continents. Instead, Darius looked like a shadow, like something that might blow away if you opened a window. His cheekbones jutted sharply beneath skin that had taken on an ashen, grayish undertone. His eyes, once bright and full of the confidence that came from being born into power, were now sunken and hollow. His tailored Tom Ford suit hung on his frame like it was draped over a mannequin. He weighed maybe 115 pounds. 6 months ago, he'd been a healthy 180. "Just try the bisque, son." Malcolm's voice cracked, a sound that didn't belong to a man who had built an empire from a single delivery truck his grandfather had driven in the 1940s. "Chef Baptiste flew in the lobster from Maine this morning. It's your favorite. You used to love lobster bisque." Darius stared at the bowl in front of him. The soup was a masterpiece, a rich, coral-colored emulsion with a perfect drizzle of truffle oil, garnished with microgreens that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. But to Darius, it didn't smell like lobster or cream or the ocean. It smelled like decay, like something rotting from the inside out. His hand trembled as he lifted the silver spoon. It felt like it weighed 10 pounds. He brought the liquid to his lips, and the moment it touched his tongue, his throat seized up. The flavor wasn't rich or buttery. It was metallic, bitter, like licking pennies mixed with ash. His stomach revolted immediately. He gagged, dropping the spoon. It clattered against the Limoges china with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire dining hall. "I can't," Darius whispered, his voice raw. "I can't do it. It tastes wrong. It all tastes wrong." "It's 3 Michelin stars, Darius." Malcolm slammed his hand down on the table. The glasses jumped. "It is perfect. Dr. Morrison says there's nothing physically wrong with you. The scans are clean, the blood work is clean, your thyroid is fine. There's no cancer, no parasites, no digestive disorders. You are starving yourself to death, and I don't understand why." "Malcolm, please." The voice was smooth, refined, like expensive silk. Victoria Washington, Malcolm's second wife and Darius's stepmother, placed a perfectly manicured hand on Malcolm's arm. She was stunning in the way that came from money and maintenance. Flawless dark skin, high cheekbones, hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost what most people made in 6 months. She looked at Darius with an expression that seemed like concern, but Darius, even in his weakened state, caught something else beneath the surface, something calculating. "The boy is suffering, Malcolm," Victoria said softly, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Maybe the pressure is too much. I've been saying this, Malcolm. The board meeting next month, the transition of power. Perhaps we should announce that I'll take Darius's seat on the executive board, just temporarily, until he recovers." Darius's fingers dug into the edge of the table. There it was, that same suggestion. Step aside. Let Victoria handle it. Go rest. Go to a treatment facility. Let the adults manage the company. "I'm not crazy," Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying an edge of desperation. "The food, it tastes like poison. All of it." Victoria sighed, picking up her own spoon with theatrical grace. She took a delicate sip of the bisque, closing her eyes as if savoring it. When she opened them, she looked at Darius with that same pitying expression. "It's delicious, darling. It's all in your head. The stress of everything your father is asking of you, it's manifesting physically. It's psychosomatic. You need help." Malcolm buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook.
Here was a man who'd negotiated with presidents, who'd stared down union strikes and corporate raiders, reduced to helplessness by watching his only son waste away. "Get it out of here," Malcolm barked at the staff hovering nervously by the kitchen door. "Fire Baptiste. I don't care if he trained at Les Bernardines. Find someone else. Fly someone in from anywhere. I don't care what it costs. Find someone who can make my son eat." The staff scrambled, terrified. They'd all witnessed this scene before, in variations, different chefs, different cuisines, same result. Darius pushed back from the table, his legs shaking as he stood. He felt like he was drowning in air that had been filtered and recycled through the mansion's climate control system too many times. He needed to get out. He needed to breathe something real. "I'm going for a drive," Darius muttered, steadying himself against the chair. "Is that wise?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "In your condition? What if you pass out behind the wheel?" "Let him go," Malcolm said, defeated. His voice had gone hollow. "Maybe the night air will help. Maybe something will help. Anything." Darius grabbed the keys to his midnight blue Mercedes AMG T from the entry table. He didn't wait for the valet. He stumbled through the front door, out into the cool Chicago night. Lake Michigan's breeze hit his face, carrying the scent of water and city. He slid behind the Mercedes, and the engine roared to life, 12 cylinders of German engineering. Too much power for a man who could barely lift his arms. But right now, he needed to feel something. Anything. He drove without thinking. He sped past the Gold Coast mansions, past Lincoln Park, out onto Lakeshore Drive. He drove until the manicured lawns turned to chain-link fences, until the boutiques turned to corner stores with barred windows. His stomach cramped violently. His body was literally eating itself, consuming muscle tissue for energy because it had no other choice. But his mind still rejected food with a primal terror that made no logical sense. Then the rain started. Not a drizzle, a full Chicago downpour that turned the windshield into a sheet of water even with the wipers on full blast. Darius slowed, his vision blurring. He was going to pass out. He could feel consciousness slipping away at the edges. He needed to stop, needed to pull over before he wrapped his $150,000 car around a light pole. Through the wall of rain, a neon sign flickered. Ruby's Diner, open 24 hours. It was a dive, the kind of place his father would buy just to bulldoze and put up luxury condos. Peeling paint, a parking lot full of potholes, surrounded by a neighborhood that the tourism board didn't include in the brochures. But to Darius, right now, it looked like salvation. He pulled the Mercedes into the lot, parking between a rust-eaten Chevy and a taxi with a cracked windshield. He cut the engine. The silence rushed back in, but this time it was different. It wasn't the oppressive silence of the manor. It was the silence of exhaustion. He opened the door and stumbled towards the warm yellow light spilling from the diner windows, leaving his billion-dollar life behind in the rain.
The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Darius pushed inside. The diner smelled like old coffee, bacon grease, and something indefinably real. Not the carefully curated aromas of his father's kitchen. Artificial vanilla pumped through vents, fresh flowers replaced daily. This was the smell of a place where people actually lived and ate and existed. The place was nearly empty. A cab driver dozed in a corner booth, his head resting against the window. Two teenagers were huddled over their phones near the jukebox, which was playing something old and bluesy. Darius collapsed into the nearest booth. The vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape. It was the most comfortable thing he'd sat on in weeks. He rested his forehead against the cool Formica table, his breathing shallow. "Rough night, baby?" The voice was low, rich, with the kind of rasp that came from too many late shifts and not enough sleep. Darius looked up. Standing there was a woman who looked like she'd been through the ringer and come out fighting. Her name tag read Carmen. She was maybe 30, with natural hair pulled back in a messy bun, held together with what looked like a pencil. She had warm brown skin, tired eyes the color of bourbon, and forearms marked with the faint scars and burns that came from years of kitchen work. She wore a stained apron over a t-shirt and jeans, and she looked at him with zero reverence, just curiosity. "Water," Darius managed to say. "Just water." Carmen raised an eyebrow. She took in the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, probably worth more than she made in 5 years. Took in the expensive suit that hung on him like a scarecrow's clothes. Took in the hollow cheeks and shaking hands. She'd seen addicts before, seen people at the end of their rope, but this wasn't that. This was something different. "You look like you're about to die in my section," Carmen said bluntly. She didn't move to get the water. "And I'm not trying to deal with that paperwork. You need food." "I can't eat," Darius said, closing his eyes. The exhaustion was crushing. I can't." "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" Carmen sighed, tucking her order pad into her apron pocket. "Look, I'm not about to watch you collapse. I'm bringing you something. If you don't eat it, fine, but I'm putting it in front of you." "I'm telling you," Darius whispered, "everything tastes wrong. It all tastes like ash and metal. I'll just throw it up." Carmen paused. She studied him more carefully, her eyes narrowing. "Ash," she repeated slowly. "Not rotten, not sour. Ash." Darius nodded, too tired to elaborate. Carmen didn't say anything else. She turned on her heel and walked toward the kitchen. Behind the line, the night cook, a heavy-set older man named Big Ray, was scraping down the grill. "Got an order?" he grunted. "Move over, Ray," Carmen said, tying her apron tighter. "You ain't supposed to be cooking, Carmen. Boss lady finds out." "Boss lady ain't here, and that boy out there is fading fast." Carmen's voice had an edge that made Ray step aside without argument. Carmen washed her hands in the deep sink, the hot water turning her knuckles red. She didn't reach for the industrial-sized containers of pre-made soup or the frozen burger patties. Instead, she bent down and pulled out a small cooler from under the prep station, her personal stash. From it, she pulled out a bunch of fresh collard greens she'd bought from the farmer's market yesterday, a couple of smoked ham hocks she'd been saving, an onion, garlic, a mason jar of chicken stock she'd made herself last Sunday from a whole bird, simmered with celery and peppercorns for hours. She wasn't making diner food, she was making medicine. She got a pot going, sautéing the onions and garlic and butter until the smell filled the kitchen, pungent, earthy, alive. She added the ham hocks, let them brown, then the stock, brought to a rolling simmer. Finally, she stripped the collard greens from their stems, chopped them rough, and added them to the pot with a pinch of salt, black pepper, and a tiny splash of apple cider vinegar. She wasn't following a recipe, she was following instinct, following memory. This was the soup her grandmother used to make when Carmen was sick as a kid, when the world felt too heavy and food felt impossible. She'd seen that look in Darius's eyes before. She'd seen it in her father's eyes before he died. It was the look of someone whose body and soul had become disconnected. 15 minutes later, she ladled the broth into a plain white bowl. No garnish, no fancy presentation, just dark green collards swimming in rich, smoky broth with chunks of tender ham. She grabbed a piece of cornbread from the warming drawer, buttered it, and carried it all out. Darius hadn't moved. He was still slumped against the table. Carmen set the bowl down with a soft thunk. "Eat." Darius lifted his head slowly. He braced himself for the smell of rot, the metallic tang that haunted every meal for 6 months. But it didn't come. Instead, he smelled home. He smelled wood smoke and earth and something almost spicy. It was the smell of warmth, of safety. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Collard greens and ham hock broth, my grandma's recipe. Drink the broth if the collards are too much, and try the cornbread." Darius picked up the spoon with trembling hands. He dipped it into the broth, watching the steam rise. He brought it to his lips. The moment it touched his tongue, his eyes flew open. It didn't taste like ash. It tasted like flavor. Real, honest, overwhelming flavor, smoky and rich and slightly tangy from the vinegar, salty and savory and grounding in a way he couldn't describe. It was like someone had grabbed him by the collar and yanked him back from the edge of a cliff. He took another spoonful, then another. Then he abandoned the spoon entirely and lifted the bowl with both hands, drinking straight from it. The warmth spread through his chest, down to his fingertips, chasing away the cold that had lived in his bones for months. He grabbed the cornbread and tore into it. The crumbly texture, the sweetness, the butter melting on his tongue. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted in his life.
He finished everything in under 3 minutes. When he set the empty bowl down, he was breathing hard, and for the first time in half a year, there was color in his face. He looked up at Carmen, his eyes wide and bewildered. "Who are you?" Carmen uncrossed her arms. "I'm the night shift waitress. That'll be $9. Darius reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and dropped them on the table. "I need more," he said, his voice stronger now, clearer. "More soup?" Carmen picked up the cash, eyebrows raised. "No." Darius stood up. His legs still felt weak, but he didn't feel like a ghost anymore. "I need you." Carmen stepped back. "I don't do that kind of work, rich boy." "No, not like that." Darius shook his head frantically, some of his old authority returning. "You don't understand. I haven't eaten a full meal in 6 months. My father has hired chefs from New York, Paris, Tokyo, everywhere. Everything they make I can't eat. It all tastes wrong. But this," he gestured at the empty bowl, "you made this, so I'm hiring you." Carmen stared. "I'll pay you $15,000 a week," Darius said, his voice steady now. The fog in his brain was lifting. "You come to my family's house. You cook only for me. Whatever I can eat, you make it." Carmen froze. She looked at the bills in her hand. Then she looked at the door toward the rain-soaked Chicago night. "Washington Manor," she repeated slowly. Her voice dropped. A shadow passed across her face. Not greed, but something darker. Recognition. And fear. "Yes. Do we have a deal?"
Carmen looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the desperation, but she also saw the name, Washington. That name meant something to her, something painful. "I can't go to that house," she said quietly, her voice tight. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" "I don't care who you are," Darius said. "You're the only person who can keep me alive." Carmen gripped the edge of the counter. She needed the money. God, did she need it. Her landlord was threatening eviction. Her grandmother's medical bills were piling up faster than she could work shifts. She was drowning in debt that her father's bankruptcy had left behind like a curse. But the Washington family, that house, that empire, it was built on her family's grave. She looked at Darius's face. He wasn't the monster she'd been raised to hate. He was just a dying boy who didn't know what his family had done. $15,000 a week, she asked. Cash, every Friday. Cash, Darius confirmed. Carmen untied her apron and threw it on the counter. Deal, but I have one condition. Name it. No one enters the kitchen when I'm cooking, Carmen said, her voice hard as steel. Especially not your stepmother. Victoria? Why? Carmen's eyes were cold. Because if she knows I'm there, she won't just fire me. She'll try to bury me. The iron gates of Washington Manor swung open slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the property itself was protesting Carmen's arrival. Her car, a beat-up 2009 Honda Accord with a dented bumper and a passenger window that didn't roll down anymore, sputtered up the pristine driveway, flanked by perfectly manicured hedges and marble fountains that probably cost more than her entire childhood home. Darius was waiting on the front steps, looking marginally better than he had the night before. The hollow desperation had faded slightly, replaced by exhaustion. But he was standing. That was progress. Beside him stood the house staff, 2 maids in crisp black and white uniforms, a stone-faced butler who looked like he'd been carved from mahogany, and, of course, Victoria. Carmen parked her Honda next to a Bentley and a Rolls-Royce, the visual contrast almost comical. She grabbed her knife roll from the passenger seat, a worn leather case containing her personal knives, the only valuable things she owned, and stepped out. "Is this a joke, Darius?" Victoria's voice cut through the morning air like a razor. She looked Carmen up and down, taking in the faded jeans, the flannel shirt, the work boots that saw better years. "You brought home a diner cook?" "She's my private chef," Darius said, his voice weak but firm. "Her name is Carmen Davis. She is to be treated with respect." Victoria laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. A private chef. She looks like she changes oil for a living. Darius, sweetheart, Chef Baptiste trained at the Culinary Institute of America. This girl probably trained at IHOP.
Carmen walked up the marble steps, stopping 2 feet from Victoria. Up close, she could smell the woman's perfume, something expensive and floral, trying to mask something underneath. Not fear, contempt. "I cook food that gets eaten," Carmen said evenly. "That's my credential." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. She stepped closer, invading Carmen's space. "We have very high standards here. I hope you've scrubbed under those fingernails." "Victoria," Darius started. "Let's go inside," Carmen interrupted, her voice calm. She'd dealt with people like Victoria before, people who thought poverty was a moral failing. She wasn't going to give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. The kitchen was massive, easily twice the size of Carmen's entire apartment. It gleamed with commercial-grade equipment, a 12-burner La Cornue range, sub-zero refrigerators, marble countertops that looked like they'd been quarried from the Sistine Chapel. It was a chef's dream, but to Carmen it felt sterile, cold like an operating room. "Everyone out," Carmen announced, dropping her knife roll on the central island. The kitchen staff, 3 sous chefs, 2 prep cooks, and a dishwasher, looked at each other, then at the head butler. "Mr. Darius's orders," the butler sighed. "Leave her." When the room finally cleared, Darius sat down on a stool, watching Carmen with something like hope in his eyes. "What do you need?" Darius asked. "We have everything. White truffles, Kobe beef, caviar." "I need trash bags," Carmen said. She walked to the enormous pantry. It was stocked like a gourmet grocery store, shelves lined with imported olive oils, aged balsamic vinegars, saffron threads in tiny vials, jars of preserved truffles, tins of foie gras. Carmen started pulling things off the shelves. She opened a jar of dried porcini mushrooms. She sniffed. Her nose wrinkled. "Garbage," she muttered, tossing it into a trash bag. She picked up a container of Himalayan pink salt, tasted a grain, spat it out immediately. Trash. "That salt costs $75, Darius protested weakly. "It tastes like chemicals," Carmen said. "Your palate isn't broken, Darius. Your pantry is poisoned." She spent the next hour gutting the kitchen. She threw out spices, sauces, and oils. She kept only the basics: plain flour, eggs, fresh vegetables that were still in sealed bags, and meat that was vacuum-sealed from the butcher. "What's wrong with all that stuff?" Darius asked, watching the trash bags pile up. "Rich people food is complicated," Carmen said, tying off another bag. "It hides things, masks flavors. If someone wants to slip something into your meals, they're going to hide it in something expensive and complicated that you won't question. We're going back to basics." She found a whole chicken in one of the sub-zero refrigerators, still sealed. She checked the date. Fresh. She didn't use the fancy convection oven. She used a simple cast-iron skillet. She'd brought her own from home. She rubbed the chicken with nothing but lemon juice, coarse salt, black pepper, and fresh thyme she'd picked up that morning. She roasted it with carrots and new potatoes. The smell started to fill the house. Not the delicate floral notes of haute cuisine, the primal, savory smell of real food. When she pulled the chicken out, the skin was golden and crackling. She carved a leg, placed it on a plain white plate. No garnish, no microgreens, no foam. "Eat," she said, setting it in front of Darius. Darius stared at the chicken. His stomach growled, an actual physical sensation he'd almost forgotten. But the fear spiked in his throat. The fear of the ash taste, the fear of gagging, the fear of his own body rejecting what it needed to survive. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. "Careful, Darius," she said sweetly. "Undercooked chicken can kill you just as fast as starvation." Darius's hand froze. Carmen slammed her hand on the counter, making him jump. "Look at me," Carmen commanded, her voice sharp. "Not her. Look at me." Darius met her eyes. They were steady, calm, anchoring. "I made this," Carmen said quietly. "It's safe. It's real. Trust me." Darius picked up his fork. He cut a piece of the chicken. He raised it to his mouth. The crunch of the skin, the juice of the meat. It tasted clean. It tasted like chicken. The metallic horror was gone. Just gone. He chewed. He swallowed. He took another bite, then another. Tears started rolling down his face. He wasn't just eating, he was remembering what it felt like to be human. "It's good," Darius choked out, his voice breaking. "Jesus Christ, it's good." Victoria's expression flickered. The mask of concern slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing something raw underneath. Rage. Calculation. She looked at Carmen, and for the first time she didn't see hired help. She saw a threat. "Enjoy your meal," Victoria said coolly, pushing off the doorframe. "I'll be in my office." As she left, Carmen watched her go. She recognized that look. She'd seen it on the faces of the loan officers who'd foreclosed on her father's restaurant. The look of someone's plan was falling apart. "Who is she?" Carmen asked Darius, quietly, keeping her voice low. "She was my father's assistant," Darius said, wiping his mouth. "They got married 3 years ago, 6 months after my mother died of cancer." Carmen's hand froze on the serving spoon. 6 months after? And when did the food start tasting wrong? Darius thought for a moment. The timeline had never seemed significant before. About 6 months ago, right after my father announced he was rewriting his will, I was supposed to get full control of the company when I turned 27. That's next month. Carmen looked at the plate of bones. She looked at the bags of expensive, contaminated spices she'd thrown away. "Darius," Carmen said, her voice dark and certain, "I don't think you have an eating disorder."
3 weeks passed. The transformation in Darius Washington was remarkable. He'd gained 18 pounds. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by the healthy brown glow of someone who was actually living. He was attending board meetings again, his voice regaining the command that made shareholders nervous and made his father cry with relief. But as Darius got stronger, the atmosphere in the mansion became toxic. Carmen had essentially moved in. She slept in a small room in the staff quarters, refusing the guest suite Darius offered. She didn't trust the house, didn't trust the water from the taps, didn't trust the air filtration system. She did all the grocery shopping herself, driving to 3 different farmers markets around Chicago to buy fresh produce, meat directly from butchers she trusted, spices from small shops where she could watch them grind the peppercorns fresh. She became more than a chef. She became a gatekeeper, a guard dog. One Thursday afternoon, Carmen was in the kitchen preparing a pot of her grandmother's oxtail stew. The kitchen was quiet, except for the bubbling of the pot and the sound of her knife on the cutting board. She realized she was out of time. She cursed under her breath. She'd been so careful, but she'd forgotten to restock. She remembered seeing fresh herbs in the pantry that morning, a delivery from an organic supplier that had come in a sealed box addressed directly to Darius. She went to retrieve them. The box was sitting on the counter, still wrapped in plastic. She cut it open. Inside were bundles of fresh herbs, rosemary, thyme, oregano, basil. She picked up the thyme. It looked perfect, vibrant green, fragrant. But underneath the clean herb smell there was something else, something faint, chemical, sweet like almonds. "Find everything you need?" Carmen spun around. Victoria was standing in the pantry doorway. She was wearing all white, a white pantsuit that made her look like an angel, but her eyes were predatory. "Just getting herbs," Carmen said, keeping her voice neutral. "You know," Victoria said, stepping into the small space, making it feel even smaller, "Darius is doing so well. Malcolm is thrilled. We all thought he was too far gone. We thought we'd have to institutionalize him." "He just needed real food," Carmen said, still holding the thyme. "Is that all it was?" Victoria reached out and touched one of the herb bundles, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the stems. "You're very talented, Carmen, but eventually Darius will be fully recovered, and when that happens, he won't need a babysitter anymore." "I'm not a babysitter. I'm a chef." Victoria smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "I've been looking into you, Carmen Davis, daughter of Samuel Davis, the man who owned Davis Family Soul Food on the South Side." Carmen's heart stopped. She gripped the counter behind her. "Sad story," Victoria continued, circling closer. "The restaurant went under 15 years ago.
He lost everything. The building, his savings. Committed suicide, didn't he? Pills and alcohol? He didn't kill himself, Carmen said through clenched teeth. He was driven to it by predatory lenders, by investors who pulled out at the last second, by developers who wanted his land. Victoria tilted her head. Developers like Washington Global Properties? The words hit Carmen like a physical blow. She'd known Washington Global Logistics had been part of the development that destroyed her neighborhood, but she never knew they were the ones who'd bought her father's debt, the ones who'd foreclosed. "You hate us, don't you?" Victoria whispered, leaning in close. "You hate this family. You're not here to save Darius. You're here for revenge. I'm here because he was dying, and I'm staying because I know why." The silence that followed was absolute. The temperature in the pantry seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's mask finally fell away completely. "Be very careful, little girl," she hissed. "Accidents happen in big kitchens. Gas leaks, fires. People slip with sharp knives all the time." Victoria turned and walked out, her white heels clicking on the marble floor. Carmen stood there, shaking. She looked down at the bundle of time in her hand. She brought it to her nose again, sniffing deeply. That almond smell, faint but distinct. She went to the sink, grabbed a clean spoon and scraped a tiny bit of residue from the stem. She touched it to her tongue. Instant numbness, then a foul, metallic bloom that spread across her palate, making her gag violently. She spat it into the sink, rinsing her mouth frantically. It wasn't enough to kill someone. It was something else. A taste modifier. Something that would trigger dysgeusia, a distortion of the sense of taste. Someone had been contaminating the herbs, the spices, everything. Every time Darius ate, he'd been dosing himself with a chemical that made food taste like rot. It was psychological warfare. If he couldn't eat, he looked insane. If he looked insane, he couldn't inherit the company. He'd be declared incompetent, committed, and Victoria would have complete control. Carmen grabbed the herbs. She needed to show Darius. She needed to get these tested. She rushed out of the pantry, but collided with a wall of muscle. The head butler, Henderson, was standing there, but he wasn't looking at her with his usual stoic disdain. He looked regretful. "I'm sorry, Miss Davis," he said quietly. "Get out of my way," Carmen said, trying to push past him. "Mrs. Washington has reported a theft, a diamond bracelet from her bedroom. It was found in your quarters." "That's a lie," Carmen shouted. "I haven't been anywhere near her room." "We have security footage," Henderson lied smoothly, "of you entering the hall outside her suite." "Darius!" Carmen screamed. "Darius!" Victoria appeared at the top of the main staircase, holding a small evidence bag containing an expensive-looking diamond bracelet. "Such a shame," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sadness. "And here I thought you were different." The guards grabbed Carmen by the arms, yanking her backward. The herbs fell from her hand, scattering on the marble floor. "It's the herbs!" Carmen yelled, fighting against the guards. "She's been poisoning him! Check the food! Check the spices!" One of the guards kicked the herbs aside, crushing them under his boot. "Get her off this property," Victoria commanded from above, "and if she comes back, call the police immediately." They dragged her towards the service entrance. She kicked and screamed, but she was overpowered. They threw her out onto the gravel driveway, tossing her knife roll after her. It landed with a thud, her precious knives scattering. "Don't come back," one guard said, his hand resting on his belt. "Mrs. Washington has every right to press charges." Carmen lay in the gravel, watching the heavy doors slam shut. She was alone. The evidence was destroyed, crushed into the marble floor and probably being mopped up by staff right now. And Darius was somewhere in that house with the woman who wanted him dead.
She scrambled to her feet, gathering her knives with shaking hands. She didn't get in her car. She knew Darius's schedule. Malcolm had mentioned it at breakfast yesterday when Carmen was serving. They were going out on the Washington Legacy, the family yacht, for a business lunch on Lake Michigan, a reintroduction event with major shareholders to prove Darius was fit to take over. The yacht was docked at Monroe Harbor, about 20 minutes away. If Darius ate lunch on that boat, prepared by catering staff that Victoria controlled, he might not survive it. Carmen threw her knife roll into the passenger seat and started the engine. The Honda coughed to life and she floored it down the driveway, gravel spraying behind her. The speedometer on Carmen's Honda was pushing 90 as she weaved through Chicago traffic on Lakeshore Drive. Her hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it over the struggling engine. She didn't care about the speed limit. She didn't care about the car that honked as she cut across 3 lanes. All she cared about was getting to Monroe Harbor before it was too late. She knew the schedule because she'd been managing Darius's meals down to the minute for 3 weeks. Today wasn't just a casual outing. This was the big test. Malcolm had invited 5 major shareholders, the people who controlled 40% of Washington Global Logistics voting shares. The purpose was to prove that Darius was healthy, competent, and ready to take the reins. If Darius refused to eat in front of them, or if he gagged and panicked, his credibility would be destroyed forever. The board would side with Victoria's suggestion to have him declared medically unfit. She'd get power of attorney. She'd control everything. And if Victoria had escalated from taste-distorting chemicals to something more lethal, Darius might not just lose his life. Monroe Harbor came into view, a forest of white masts and gleaming hulls bobbing against the gray Chicago sky. Carmen could see the Washington Legacy even from the entrance, a 180-foot super yacht that looked more like a floating mansion than a boat. A security booth blocked the main entrance. A uniformed guard stepped out, hand raised in a stop gesture. Carmen didn't slow down. She yanked the wheel hard to the right, jumping the curb and smashing through a decorative chain barrier that was more for show than security. The undercarriage scraped against concrete, throwing sparks, but the car held together. In the rearview mirror, she saw the guard shouting into his radio, running after her. She had maybe 2 minutes before police arrived. She slammed on the brakes near Monroe Dock, the tires squealing. There it was, the Washington Legacy, engines churning white foam at the stern. Crew members were untying the mooring lines. "No, no, no!" Carmen whispered, throwing the door open. She grabbed her knife roll, not as a weapon, but as her identity, her proof that she belonged in a kitchen. She sprinted down the wooden planks, her boots pounding against the planks. "Stop!" she screamed, though she knew the roar of the yacht's engines would drown her out. "Stop the boat!" On the upper deck of the Washington Legacy, the scene was pristine perfection. A long table was set with white linens, crystal champagne flutes catching the afternoon light, and a centerpiece of white orchids that probably cost more than Carmen made in a month. Malcolm Washington sat at the head of the table, looking proud and relieved. Across from him were 5 elderly white men in expensive suits, the shareholders who held Darius's future in their wrinkled hands. "Gentlemen," Malcolm said, his deep voice carrying that note of controlled power that came from decades of commanding rooms, "I appreciate you coming today. I know there have been concerns about my son's health, rumors, malicious gossip from competitors who'd like nothing more than to see this family fall apart. But, as you'll see, Darius is stronger than ever." Darius sat to his father's right, wearing a tailored navy suit that actually fit him now. He looked good. Healthy color in his face, clear eyes, steady hands. But inside, he felt exposed, vulnerable. For 3 weeks, Carmen had been his safety net. Every bite he took, he'd look at her first for approval, for reassurance. Now she was gone, and he was alone. Victoria sat across from him, wearing a cream-colored dress that made her look angelic. She reached across the table and patted his hand with manufactured warmth. "Relax, darling," she said sweetly. "Chef Marcel prepared something very simple for you. Grilled salmon with lemon butter. Very mild, nothing challenging." A server appeared, placing a covered silver dome in front of each person at the table. Darius stared at his plate. The old anxiety was crawling up his throat like a living thing. What if it happens again? What if I gag in front of everyone? "Trust your gut," Carmen had told him a dozen times. "If something feels wrong, don't put it in your mouth. I don't care who made it or who's watching." "Darius?" Victoria's voice had an edge now.
Don't be rude. These men took time out of their schedules to be here. Something's, Darius whispered, setting down his fork. Something's wrong with this. Oh, for God's sake, Victoria snapped, her mask slipping. It's fish. Just eat it. Malcolm looked embarrassed, frustrated. Son, please. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the lower deck, shouting, the sound of heavy boots on metal stairs. Darius, don't eat it! Every head turned. Carmen burst onto the sun deck, her chest heaving, her hair wild from running, pursued by 2 security guards in black uniforms. Carmen? Darius stood up, knocking his chair backward.
"Get her off this boat!" Victoria shrieked, standing so fast her chair tipped over. "She's insane! She stole from me! Guards, remove her now!" The guards grabbed Carmen, slamming her down onto the teak deck. Her knife roll skidded across the wood, stopping at Mr. Brennan's feet. "It's poison!" Carmen screamed, her face pressed against the deck. "Darius, the salmon, she's trying to kill you! Don't eat it!" "Remove her immediately," Malcolm roared, horrified by the scene unfolding in front of his investors. "Who authorized this woman on my boat?" "Wait!" Darius's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. It wasn't the voice of a sick man anymore. It was command, authority, the voice of someone who'd been born to lead but had forgotten how. He walked over to where the guards were pinning Carmen. "Let her up." "Sir, she's dangerous," one guard protested. "I said let her up or you're both fired. Now." The guards hesitated, then released her. Carmen scrambled to her feet, bruises already forming on her arms. She looked at Darius, her eyes desperate and fierce. "She put something in the food," Carmen panted, pointing a shaking finger at Victoria. "I found the herbs this morning. They're laced with chemicals that mess with your taste. That's why you've been starving. That's why you thought you were losing your mind. It was never you, Darius. It was her." Victoria laughed. It was a cold, crystalline sound. "Arthur, do you hear this? She's delusional, obsessed with your son. She's making up conspiracy theories because we fired her for theft this morning." Victoria turned to the shareholders, her expression one of profound embarrassment. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry you have to witness this. This woman has been stalking Darius. We found stolen jewelry in her room. The police are already involved." "I didn't steal anything," Carmen shouted. "She planted it. She's been poisoning him for months." "Enough!" Malcolm's voice boomed across the deck. He looked at his son, his expression torn between anger and confusion. "Darius, this is humiliating. Sit down, eat your lunch. We'll deal with this situation when we dock." The shareholders were watching with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car crash. This was better than any corporate drama they'd seen in years. Darius looked at his father, then at Victoria, then at the plate of salmon, still steaming on the table. He walked back to the table slowly. He picked up the plate in both hands. "If it's just salmon," Darius said, his eyes locked on Victoria, "then you eat it." The silence on the deck was absolute. The only sounds were the wind, the cry of gulls, and the low rumble of the yacht's engines. Victoria's smile froze on her face. "Don't be childish, Darius. That's your lunch." "You said it was perfect," Darius said, stepping closer to her. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "You said Chef Marcel prepared it specially. You've been so concerned about my health, stepmother, so worried about me. So show me it's safe. Take one bite." He held the plate out to her. Victoria stared at the pink flesh of the salmon. Her throat worked. A single bead of sweat appeared at her temple, rolling down slowly. I've already eaten," she stammered. "One bite," Darius pressed, "for my peace of mind. Surely, as my loving stepmother, you can do that." The shareholders were leaning forward now. Their instincts were sharp. They were predators who'd built fortunes by sensing weakness, and they smelled blood in the water. "Yes, Victoria," said Mr. Brennan slowly, setting down his own fork. "Humor the boy. Prove the young lady wrong." Victoria's eyes darted around the deck, to the guards, to Malcolm, to the open water beyond. She was trapped. If she refused, she looked guilty. If she ate it... "Fine," Victoria spat. "This is absolutely ridiculous." She stabbed a piece of the salmon. She brought it to her mouth. Her hand wasn't shaking. She had too much control for that, but her eyes were wide, terrified. She put the fish in her mouth. She chewed once. Twice. She swallowed, forcing it down. "See?" she said, her voice tight. "Perfectly fine. Now get this maniac off." She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles going white.
"Victoria?" Malcolm asked, stepping towards her. I can't." She clutched at her throat. Her breathing became labored, wheezing. Her face started to turn a dark, alarming shade of red. "She's having an allergic reaction," Carmen shouted, her chef instincts overriding her anger. She rushed forward, pushing past the shareholders. "What did you put in there? What is it?" Victoria couldn't speak. She was clawing at her neck, gasping for air. She collapsed to her knees, convulsing. "Someone call a medic," Malcolm screamed, dropping beside her wife. "What's happening to her?" "Does she have allergies?" Carmen demanded, kneeling next to Victoria and checking her airway. "Shellfish? Nuts? What?" "Shellfish," Malcolm cried, his hands shaking as he loosened Victoria's collar. "She's deathly allergic to shellfish, but this is salmon." Carmen grabbed the plate and brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply. Beneath the butter and lemon, she caught it, a concentrated, briny smell that didn't belong. "Shrimp paste," Carmen said, her voice cold as ice. She injected the salmon with concentrated shrimp paste. She thought Darius would eat it. She was planning to make it look like accidental contamination, a tragic mistake by the catering staff. The irony was sickening. Victoria had prepared a meal designed to kill Darius, probably planning to blame it on food poisoning or frame it as evidence of his continued mental instability. But in her arrogance, she'd been forced to consume her own poison. "Turn the boat around," Malcolm shouted toward the bridge. "Get us to shore, now!" Victoria's eyes were rolling back, her lips were turning blue. The shareholders were on their phones, some calling 911, others probably calling their lawyers. Darius stood over the scene with his face like stone. He looked at Carmen, reached out, and pulled her up from the chaos. "You saved my life," he whispered. "We're not done yet," Carmen said quietly, looking at Victoria's convulsing form. "She's going to survive, and when she does, she's going to have an army of lawyers."
The VIP waiting room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. Malcolm Washington sat in a chair that cost less than his watch, his head in his hands, looking like he'd aged a decade in the 6 hours since they'd rushed Victoria to the ER. Victoria was in intensive care, intubated and sedated, but stable. The doctors had confirmed it. Anaphylactic shock induced by high concentrations of shellfish proteins. They'd barely saved her life. Darius sat across from his father, a cup of hospital coffee cooling in his hands. He hadn't left. Carmen sat beside him, arms crossed, staring at the industrial tile floor. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving behind exhaustion and something darker, anger. The doors opened. 2 detectives entered, followed by a doctor in scrubs. "Mr. Washington?" Detective Chen asked, addressing Malcolm. She was a small Asian woman with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen it all. Malcolm looked up, his face haggard. "Is she—" "She's stable," the doctor said. "She'll wake up, but Detective Chen has some questions about what we found." Malcolm frowned. "Found? It was an allergic reaction, a terrible accident." "It wasn't an accident, Dad," Darius said quietly. He set down his coffee cup. "And it wasn't just allergies." Detective Chen nodded. "Your son is right. We ran a full toxicology screen on Mrs. Washington's stomach contents. We found the shellfish proteins, yes, but we also found traces of digoxin." "Digoxin?" Malcolm's brow furrowed. That's a heart medication, isn't it?" "In therapeutic doses, yes, but in high doses, it causes cardiac arrhythmia and can induce heart attacks. It's colorless, nearly tasteless when masked properly, and if administered correctly, it mimics natural cardiac death." The room went silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. "She was trying to kill me today," Darius said, his voice eerily calm. "The shrimp paste was to mask the bitterness of the digoxin. She thought I'd eat it in front of the shareholders, that I'd have what looked like a heart attack or stroke on the boat. Young, stressed executive with an eating disorder has sudden cardiac event. Tragic, but believable." Carmen spoke up, her voice rough. "It goes back further than today. The herbs, the spices in your kitchen, they've been contaminated for months with chemicals that cause dysgeusia, taste distortion. That's why everything tasted like metal and ash to you, Darius. She was slowly starving you, making you look unstable." Detective Chen pulled out a tablet, showing them photos.
We recovered contaminated spices from your home. The lab found gymnemic acid, pine nut derivatives, and several other compounds known to severely alter taste perception. Someone's been systematically poisoning your food supply." Malcolm slumped back in his chair, all the strength draining out of him. "Why?" His voice cracked. "She had everything. Money, status, my trust. Why would she—" "She didn't want you, Malcolm. She wanted the company. With me dead or institutionalized and you grieving, she'd have had power of attorney. She'd have controlled Washington Global Logistics." Carmen stood up, walked over to Malcolm. She didn't offer comfort. She offered truth. "It goes back further than that," Carmen said, her voice hard. "My father was Samuel Davis. He owned Davis Family Soul Food on the South Side." Malcolm looked up at her through red-rimmed eyes. Recognition dawned slowly. "The restaurant. 15 years ago. Victoria was a loan officer at Chicago Trust before she became your executive assistant," Carmen revealed. "I found the paperwork in my father's old files after he died. She's the one who denied his loan restructuring. She's the one who tipped off Washington Global Properties that the land was vulnerable. She orchestrated the foreclosure that destroyed him." Carmen's voice shook with suppressed rage. "She ruined my father, drove him to suicide just to impress yours. She destroyed my family as a stepping stone to climbing into yours." Malcolm's face crumbled. He looked at Carmen, then at his son. He saw the strength in this woman they'd tried to throw away. He saw the resolve in Darius, the son he'd almost given up for dead. "I am so sorry. I was blind. I was so focused on building a legacy that I didn't see the viper I'd brought into my own home." "You don't need to apologize to me," Darius said. He put a hand on Carmen's shoulder. "You need to make this right." The next morning, the story broke like a bomb. Billionaire's wife arrested for attempted murder. The poison pantry, how a socialite nearly starved her stepson to death. It wasn't just a society scandal, it was a corporate earthquake. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, attempted murder, and the working-class hero who saved the heir. Victoria was formally charged the moment she regained consciousness: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. Her lawyer quit within hours. The evidence was overwhelming: the contaminated spices, the poisoned salmon, the financial trail Carmen had provided showing Victoria's involvement in the foreclosure of Davis Family Soul Food 15 years ago. But for Darius, the victory wasn't in the headlines or the schadenfreude of watching Victoria's empire collapse. The victory was quieter, more personal. He stood in the massive kitchen of Washington Manor, the kitchen that had been his prison for 6 months. The contaminated spices were gone, seized as evidence. The industrial refrigerators had been emptied and sterilized. The space felt different now, cleaner, safer. Carmen was packing her knife roll at the central island. "Where are you going?" Darius asked, leaning against the counter. "Home," Carmen said, zipping the leather case. "Job's done. You're alive. She's in jail. You don't need a bodyguard chef anymore." "I don't need a bodyguard," Darius agreed. "I need a partner." Carmen paused. She looked up at him. The skeletal, dying boy she'd met in that rainy diner was completely gone. In his place was a man who'd faced death and come out stronger. "I'm not a corporate type, Darius. I don't belong in boardrooms and shareholder meetings." "I know. And I don't belong in this tomb of a house anymore. It's too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts." He slid a manila folder across the marble counter. "What is this?" Carmen asked suspiciously. "Open it."
Carmen opened the folder. Inside were property deeds, architectural plans, and a letter from Washington Global Properties. She scanned the documents, her breath catching. It was the building on 47th and King Drive, the old Davis Family Soul Food location. The property had been tied up in development hell for 15 years, owned by a subsidiary of Washington Global. Darius had bought it back, and he was signing it over to her. "I can't accept this," Carmen whispered, her hands shaking. "It's not a gift," Darius said. "It's an investment. I'm stepping down as incoming CEO. I told my father this morning. I'm taking a sabbatical, maybe permanently. I have a lot of weight to gain back.
a lot of living to do, and I can't do it eating alone in this mausoleum." He walked around the counter and stood in front of her. "Reopen the restaurant, Carmen. Cook real food. Feed people who actually appreciate it. And let me," he smiled, "let me wash dishes. Be the sous chef, whatever you need." Carmen looked at the deed, her father's restaurant, the place that had been stolen from him, that had broken him. She looked at Darius, this man who'd been born with everything, but had almost lost the only thing that mattered, his life. For the first time in 15 years, the knot of anger in her chest loosened. "You're terrible at washing dishes," Carmen said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm a fast learner," Darius said, "and I'm not going to go easy on you just because you're a billionaire. I'm counting on it." 6 months later, the line stretched around the entire block on 47th Street. It was snowing, one of those heavy Chicago snowfalls that turned the city into a postcard. But nobody in line seemed to mind. They stood in the cold, breath misting, stamping their feet, all waiting for the same thing. The neon sign above the door buzzed warmly through the falling snow. Davis Family Soul Food, Est 1985, Reborn 2025. Inside, the restaurant was controlled chaos. The sound of laughter mixed with the clatter of plates, the hiss of the flat-top grill, the jazz playing on the speakers. The smell. God, the smell. Collard greens and cornbread, fried chicken and black-eyed peas, oxtails and candied yams, peach cobbler and sweet potato pie. It smelled like home, like memory, like everything good in the world. Carmen stood at the pass, calling orders. She wore a pristine white chef's coat with her name embroidered in gold thread, Chef Carmen Davis. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she had a wooden spoon in one hand like a conductor's baton. "Table 7 needs the smothered pork chops. Table 12 is still waiting on the fried catfish. And somebody tell me why Table 4's collards aren't out yet." "Yes, chef," the brigade shouted back. At the dish station in the back, a man in a simple black t-shirt and jeans was elbow-deep in suds. His arms showed the definition of 6 months of hard physical work. His face had filled out, healthy and strong. He looked nothing like the gaunt ghost who'd stumbled into Ruby's diner that rainy night. Darius Washington, former heir to a $45 billion empire, was washing dishes, and he'd never been happier. Malcolm Washington pushed through the front door, shaking snow off his overcoat. He looked around the packed restaurant, truckers sitting next to lawyers, college students next to retirees, politicians next to construction workers, even in their appreciation of good food. He walked up to the bar where Darius was drying glasses. "Hey, Dad," Darius grinned. "Table for one?" "Actually," Malcolm said, "I was hoping the dishwasher had a break. Maybe we could talk." Darius laughed. "I got promoted. I'm sous chef now." "I can see that." Malcolm looked towards the kitchen where Carmen was plating a dish with laser focus, her team moving around her like a well-oiled machine. "She's extraordinary, both of you." "She saved my life," Darius said simply, "in every way that matters." The bell rang. "Order up. Darius, run these to table 9. "Gotta go, Dad." Darius grabbed 2 steaming plates, oxtails over rice with candied yams on the side, and weaved through the crowded dining room with practiced ease. Later that night, after the last customer had left and the closed sign was flipped, Carmen and Darius sat in a back booth, the same red vinyl booths that Carmen had insisted on when they renovated, a callback to Ruby's diner, where it all began. Carmen placed a bowl in front of him, simple and unadorned. It was the collard green and ham hock soup, the dish that had started everything. "For old time's sake?" she asked. Darius picked up his spoon. He took a sip. It was perfect. It tasted like safety, like trust, like love. "You know," Darius said, dipping a piece of cornbread into the broth, "my father offered me the CEO position again last week, said the board unanimously wants me back, said I could name my salary." Carmen stiffened slightly. "And what did you say?" Darius reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were rough, scarred from burns and knife cuts and years of hard work. To him, they were the most beautiful things in the world. Darius said, "I told him I'm busy. I have a dinner rush to prep for tomorrow and a restaurant to help run, and, he squeezed her hand, a life to build with someone who taught me what it means to actually live. Carmen squeezed back, her eyes glistening. You're crazy. You gave up billions. Maybe, Darius grinned, but at least I'm not hungry anymore. He leaned across the table and kissed her. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It tasted like garlic and pot liquor and exhaustion and joy. It was real and imperfect and absolutely perfect. The billionaire's son had walked away from an empire, but he'd found something more valuable than money could ever buy. He'd found his appetite, not just for food, but for life. And in the warm glow of the kitchen that bore Carmen's father's name, with the woman who'd cooked him back from the edge of death, Darius Washington was finally, truly full. Outside, the snow continued to fall on the south side of Chicago. The neon sign buzzed warmly, casting a red glow on the white drifts. Inside, the pilot lights on the stoves burned steady, ready for tomorrow's service, because there would always be tomorrow. There would always be people who needed feeding, not just their bodies, but their souls. And Carmen Davis, daughter of Samuel Davis, keeper of her grandmother's recipes, guardian of memory and tradition and love made manifest in cast iron and seasoning and heat, she would be there. With Darius by her side, learning to chop onions without crying, learning that the most expensive ingredient isn't truffles or caviar or gold leaf, it's trust. It's the willingness to take something that's been broken and transform it into something that nourishes. To take pain and turn it into purpose. To take the last meal, the one you thought would kill you, and turn it into the first meal of a new life. That's the alchemy of real cooking. That's the magic that happens when you feed someone with intention, with care, with love. Victoria Washington would spend the next 20 years in prison, her appeals denied, her fortune seized in civil suits. The poison she'd planted had ultimately consumed her. Malcolm Washington stepped down from Washington Global Logistics, handing control to a board of directors while he focused on philanthropy, specifically programs supporting small businesses in communities his company had once helped destroy. And every Sunday, without fail, he would come to Davis Family Soul Food. He would sit in the back booth, and Carmen would bring him a bowl of collard greens and cornbread, and they would talk about Samuel Davis, about legacy, about the weight of family names and the price of redemption, because some debts can never be fully repaid, but they can be acknowledged, they can be honored, and sometimes that's enough.